Ever find yourself like reaching for that bag of chips after a crazy day?
Yeah.
Or maybe just disappearing into a good book, We all have our ways of seeking comfort, but what happens when that desire for comfort starts calling all the shots? Today, we're diving deep, deep into the world of the comfort idol.
And it's definitely more than just enjoying a little treat every now and then. We're talking about when that need to avoid discomfort, any kind of discomfort, takes over and it becomes the main way we navigate life.
Yeah, it's like this underlying current. Right. And to help us navigate this, we've got these really insightful counseling toolkits from Redeemer Counseling by Kate Clarop. She's got her PhD. And she really doesn't beat around the bush. She describes a comfort idol as, and I'm quoting here, an over-desire for freedom from pain, stress, and unpleasantness of any kind.
And that's really the crux of it, isn't it? It's this intense aversion to anything that feels unpleasant.
Yeah.
As if we've kind of set our internal thermostat to comfortable, and anytime there's a shift, we start scrambling.
We just want to get back to that comfortable place.
Right.
And I think that's where the idol part comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're prioritizing this feeling good above everything else, even if it means, shirking our responsibilities or numbing ourselves to those difficult emotions that inevitably come up.
Yeah. And the toolkit really highlights how this all ties into like this fear of worthlessness, this underlying belief that we're just not enough as we are.
So we're reaching for these external things, behaviors, substances, to kind of soothe those feelings of inadequacy, right?
Yeah.
And the toolkit lists some examples like, excessive drinking, oversleeping, even things like going on these shopping sprees or constantly needing to be entertained. And these are things, we encounter every day. So how do we know when they cross the line? When does it go from, just enjoying a glass of wine to it being something more?
That's where, understanding the why behind those behaviors is so crucial. It's less about labeling certain actions as bad and more about examining, like, what's the motivation fueling them? Are you actually relaxing, recharging, or are you avoiding a difficult conversation, a looming deadline, or even those deeper feelings, that we were talking about, that sense of worthlessness?
Yeah, it definitely makes you stop and think, doesn't it? And the toolkit digs into the psychology, like why people develop these comfort idols.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating stuff.
It is. A key factor is our inherent struggle to tolerate distress. I mean, we're wired to seek pleasure, avoid pain, right? But sometimes we get stuck in that avoidance mode.
So instead of facing those feelings head on, we're finding ways to numb them, even if it's just temporarily.
Precisely. And this is actually where we can start to see the connection to addiction.
Oh, interesting.
D. Sumrock, MD, he defines addiction as this compulsive, ritualized comfort seeking.
So whether it's, that extra glass of wine or the endless scrolling on social media or even burying ourselves in work, it's all seeking that hit of relief, that temporary escape.
And recognizing those patterns,
Yeah.
Understanding the underlying mechanisms at play, that's crucial.
Because once we understand the why, then we can actually start to take action. But before we jump into those practical steps, I kind of want to look at a familiar story through a new lens.
Okay.
The parable of the prodigal son. We often hear it as a story of forgiveness, right?
Right.
But what does it tell us about this whole comfort-seeking thing?
It's an interesting angle, isn't it? I mean, we tend to focus on the forgiveness aspect, but the younger brother's choices, they really reveal a lot about his relationship with comfort.
Right. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the younger son, he's the restless one, demands his inheritance, takes off to live a life of, let's just say, questionable choices.
Yeah, and in those choices, in his motivations, we can really start to see that comfort idol at work.
And the toolkit, it actually breaks down the younger son's behavior through this lens of his and gets his system of self-redemption. And it starts by examining his past, the experiences that shaped his self-perception. What kind of background might lead someone to seek comfort in such extreme ways?
Well, the source doesn't give us specific details about his childhood, but we can start to piece things together from the cultural context.
Right.
Imagine, growing up in the shadow of this perfect older brother, always having to meet or exceed these expectations. How do you think that would impact the younger brother's sense of self?
Oh, it would be so easy to feel inadequate in that situation, right? Constantly comparing yourself, feeling like you're coming up short.
Exactly. Those early experiences, those messages that we internalize, they really have a profound impact on how we see ourselves. And then you layer on top of that the strict religious and societal norms of that time. I mean, the pressure to conform, to live up to these often unattainable standards.
Must have been immense.
Immense.
So the younger son, he's dealing with this feeling of never being good enough.
Yeah.
Of being unworthy.
Yeah.
And he's surrounded by these impossible expectations. So no wonder he wants to escape.
And escape he does. Takes his inheritance, essentially saying, I'm out of here, to responsibility, and he runs off to this distant land, seeking comfort in all the wrong places.
The toolkit specifically mentions his surface idols, right?
Yeah.
Alcohol, food, sex. He's chasing that pleasure, numbing the pain, trying to outrun those feelings of inadequacy. It's almost like he's running towards something, but he's also desperately trying to get away from something else at the same time.
Absolutely. He's running from responsibility, from the weight of those expectations, from those deep-seated feelings of never being enough. And that, as we've been discussing, that is the hallmark of the comfort idol. It's almost like a vicious cycle, you know? The more we try to outrun those uncomfortable feelings, the more power we actually give them.
Wow.
And the more we seek comfort in those external things, the more disconnected we become from ourselves, from others, and ultimately, I think, from a source of true, lasting comfort.
It's so easy to get caught up in that cycle, though. But the good news is the toolkit, it actually provides a way out. Like it outlines some really practical steps we can take to break free from this.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be that first step toward dismantling these comfort idols that we've built in our lives?
Well, it's not as simple as just cutting out those surface idols.
Right.
The drinking, the binge watching, whatever your particular escape might be.
Right.
The toolkit emphasizes that it's really about shifting our focus, from what we're trying to avoid to what we're turning towards.
So it's not enough to just stop the negative behavior.
Yeah.
We have to actually replace it with something positive.
Exactly.
Okay. So what does that look like? Like in real life, how do we actually do that?
Well, one really powerful strategy that they talk about is setting what they call guardrails around those potential escapes. Think of it as creating these boundaries to kind of protect yourself.
Guardrails. So like setting limits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, if you tend to disappear down that rabbit hole of social media when you're feeling stressed, maybe you set a time limit on your usage, or maybe you unsubscribe from those tempting online stores that fuel your shopping sprees.
It's about recognizing those patterns and making a conscious effort to interrupt them. Right.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So we've set up these guardrails. What comes next?
Well, the next step, and this kind of goes hand in hand with setting boundaries, is learning to identify and name our emotions instead of immediately reaching for that quick fix.
I imagine that's easier said than done for a lot of us, though, right?
Oh, for sure. It definitely takes practice, but the toolkit stresses how crucial this is for breaking free. Because when we pause and we just acknowledge what we're feeling, whether it's sadness, anxiety, loneliness, without judgment, we actually create space for healthier coping mechanisms to emerge.
So instead of that extra glass of wine or another Netflix marathon, we might call a friend, go for a walk, or even lose ourselves in a hobby that brings us joy.
You got it. It's about finding those life-giving activities that nourish us, not numb us. And this might sound a little counterintuitive, but the toolkit also recommends small acts of service to others as a way to combat this comfort seeking.
That does seem a little counterintuitive. Like, how does helping others help us break free from our own desire for comfort?
It might seem counterintuitive, but it's actually remarkably effective. Because when we shift our focus outward, and we start engaging in acts of kindness, compassion, it helps us break free from that self-centered cycle of comfort seeking.
So we stop focusing so much on our own needs and start focusing on the needs of others.
Precisely. And it doesn't have to be anything grand. It could be lending an ear to a friend who's going through a tough time, helping an elderly neighbor with their groceries, or even just smiling at a stranger. These small acts of kindness, they can have a ripple effect, both on ourselves and those around us. And it reminds us that true comfort, that sense of connection, purpose, it often comes from giving, not just receiving.
It makes you realize that this whole comfort idol thing, it's not just an individual struggle, It affects our relationships too.
Yeah.
What about those of us who are, trying to support someone who's struggling with this? The toolkit mentions it can be, it can be challenging. So what advice does it offer?
Yeah, you're right. It can be incredibly tough. The toolkit points out that people struggling with this particular idol can be very good at, downplaying their struggles or avoiding conflict altogether.
Right.
It's not intentional, but it can make it difficult to have those, those necessary but sometimes difficult conversations.
It's easy to get stuck in that frustrating cycle, right?
Yeah.
Where you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells.
Exactly. Which is why the toolkit really emphasizes, approaching the situation with grace and understanding, remembering that, this often stems from a deep sense of shame and unworthiness.
So patience is essential, even when it's hard, right? But we don't want to enable unhealthy behaviors either. So how do we balance that support with accountability?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We want to be supportive without enabling. And that's where, what they call loving confrontation comes in. The toolkit talks about the importance of, gently but firmly holding up a mirror and saying, hey, I see you. I see this pattern, and I'm here to support you in breaking free from this.
So it sounds like offering support might look like encouraging them to maybe seek professional help, like counseling, or even just offering to be an accountability partner as they work through those practical steps that we were talking about.
Absolutely. It's about creating that space for change, that environment of support and safety. But the toolkit reminds us that lasting change, the kind that brings true comfort, it can only come from a place of grace and acceptance.
And that kind of brings us back to the prodigal son, right? The moment he returns home, he's expecting the worst, but his father welcomes him with open arms. I mean, that's a powerful image of unconditional love and forgiveness.
It really is. The toolkit emphasizes how the father's embrace, it changes everything for the prodigal son. It restores his identity. It transforms him from a self-proclaimed ashamed servant back into a beloved son.
It's a beautiful reminder that no matter how far we've strayed, how caught up we've gotten in our comfort-seeking patterns, there's always a path back to wholeness, to true connection.
And to that source of unconditional love and acceptance that we can never truly find in, a pint of ice cream or the latest Netflix binge.
This whole comfort idol concept. Yeah. It's really made me stop and think it's not just some like abstract psychology term.
Right.
It's about like our shared human experience. Mm-hmm. That desire for connection, for acceptance, for wholeness.
It's a powerful lens through which we can examine our behaviors, our motivations, our deepest desires.
Yeah, it's like holding up a mirror, right? Mm-hmm. What we see might not always be pretty, but that self-awareness, that's the first step towards change.
Exactly. And the toolkit really encourages us to embrace that journey. It might be challenging, but it ultimately leads to a more authentic and fulfilling life.
A life where we're present in each moment.
Yeah.
Embracing both the good and the bad without the need to numb ourselves or escape.
A life where we can embrace our imperfections, knowing that we are enough just as we are.
Well, I think we've certainly taken a deep dive into the world of the comfort idol today. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. What if we started looking at all our behaviors, all our choices through this lens? What might we discover about ourselves? What opportunities for growth might we uncover? Just something to think about as you go about your day.
I love that. Stay curious, stay open to those aha moments. And remember, even when things feel uncomfortable, there's always potential for growth and healing.
That's all the time we have for today's Deep Dives. Until next time, happy exploring.